This is Transqat, a safe space to stand. Transgender issues, queer people, respectful conversations. I'm host Clare McCarthy. Welcome to Transqat. Fantasy fiction encompasses a number of subgenres. I have long been a comic book nerd, that's my jam, but there's also dystopian fiction, think The Matrix or The Hunger Games, high fantasy, grand epics like Middle-earth and A Song of Ice and Fire, and sword and sorcery stuff a la Dungeons & Dragons. Isekai is a subgenre with its roots in ancient Japan. The basic premise is that the protagonist is transported from the world we, the readers, know into some fantasy realm and finds some way to thrive there. In English lit, Mark Twain, Lewis Carroll, and C.S. Lewis, among many others, used this template for very well-known stories. And for the longest time, fantasy stood as an allegory for queer characters. The Hays Code, the Comics Code Authority, and similar entities prohibited any positive portrayal of queer folks. But in fantasy, we could see glimmers of ourselves. Now, these days, queer representation abounds in the genre despite the best efforts of Moms for Liberty, and it's a relief to see yourself literally in fiction without having to interpret the figurative. I Left My Hormones in Another World is a series of contemporary isekai novels written by Connecticut-based author Angela Wicke. It contains the familiar tropes of fantasy, a quest, a band of companions, the fish-out-of-waterness of heroes and heroines. I hope you enjoy this conversation and that you'll consider picking up Angela's books.
This whole winter thing.
I'm from upstate New York, so like the Rochester, Buffalo area. So
so this is nothing.
I was gonna say this is a lot nicer, but it's still a little too cold for my tastes.
Post-election, how are you doing? How are you feeling?
I mean, not great, as I'm sure could be understood. I'm trying to remind myself that our existence is defiance, and that in and of itself, like, I don't have to change the world every single day. It's just like, continue on, and you're doing something that they don't want you to be doing. So, and that's just a good thing.
So I do want to hear about you and your story, but I should let folks know that we are here today to talk about Volume 1 and Volume 2 of I Left My Hormones in Another World. Give me the elevator pitch. Let listeners know what we're going to be talking about.
Sure thing. So I Left My Hormones in Another World is inspired by Japanese light novels, the isekai genre, as well as sort of like generic video game fantasy RPGs and D&D, but with a bit of a queer twist. So the main character, her name is Jen Joyce. She is a trans woman from somewhere in Connecticut. She works her dead-end office job and doesn't really have a thing for fantasy, which isn't so great when one day she wakes up having been absconded with to a fantasy world.
I hate when I'm absconded.
Yes. Yes, she is absconded to a fantasy world and is told, hey, you can't go home until you defeat the demon lord. That's all. And of course, the first thought that comes to her head is, wait a minute, what about my hormone therapy? They're very short novels. It's going to be about like a 7 or 8 book series of, like, again, very short, easy to digest novels of Jen trying to work her way up through the ranks as an adventurer in order to one day challenge the demon lord and get back home and back on her hormones.
The plot is very much out of, as you said, an RPG where there are a series of tasks she has to perform. One of the things that I had not thought about until I was reading your books is how similar this type of fantasy is to Roman comedy. In terms of there are stock characters.
Yeah, like tropes. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have in this one, you have the bard. There's a well, essentially a cleric, right? There's
Yeah, the paladin.
the
Yep.
paladin. And how do you say the paladin's name?
Oh, Jean.
So there's that, and
It's
there's
meant
that.
to sound, I picked it because it sounds pretentious.
Well done. Uh, and there's the big bad who's sort of cloaked in darkness for the initial volumes of the series. So there's familiar territory in terms of genre. Does that help you or hinder you as a writer?
I think it helps in the way that you're not kind of starting from nowhere. So with the isekai genre that this is very heavily inspired by, it has that checklist of like those initial steps you take. Like there's usually some kind of like goddess or divine force that usually some kind of goddess or divine force that pulls the hero into this new world. They usually, reject the new world at first. And like you said, we have those like the bard character is normally like the super sexual one who's like, oh, I'm so smooth with the ladies, and you have the paladin who's like super, super righteous. And so my goal with using these tropes was to start with something familiar and then, or like something familiar to the reader, and then work to subvert it as well. So you have the goddess character who maybe isn't as like divine and well-meaning as you would expect from someone of her stature. You have the bard who claims to be very much like a ladies' man, but you kind of get the impression like, maybe not so much. And
Well,
then
there's a relationship developing there over the course of the first two books between Jen and Harv that
mhm,
gets a little closer as they go along. But Harv is very much initially comic relief.
yes. That doesn't necessarily go away, but it is nice. Most of the people that I've spoken to, Harv the Bard is everyone's favorite character. I think he I think he's really endearing to people again as the comedic relief, but he also serves in the first book especially as he has a little bit of a character arc where he starts out again. Jen is outed as a trans woman, and everyone in this world, they've never heard of this before. They've never experienced anything like this before. And and so a lot of people are being judgmental. Harv is convinced that Jen is crazy, but he's willing to go along with it. But then as he spends more time with her, as he experiences being around her and seeing how she responds to the disparaging things that he says, he eventually comes to terms with it, and he becomes like her staunchest ally. So I think that also is what endears him to people, in addition to him being just like pure comic relief when things are going
Well,
sour.
but what you're able to do by making Jen the only trans person in this world that we know of,
That you know of.
that
Yes.
we know of, yeah, is that we get to see how people encounter that and what their
Hmm.
reactions are, and we kind of make decisions and judgments about these characters based on how they treat Jen. So
Hmm.
when Harv moves closer to saying, I see your soul, I see who you are as a person, and the rest doesn't really matter to me, we are endeared to him.
Yes, absolutely. It's one of the more interesting parts about writing a story like this. No two people's reactions are exactly the same. You have someone like Sir Brunswick, the trainer, who he's just like, "Oh, you're a woman? Cool. Can you swing a sword? That's all I care about."
Right.
But then you have someone like Witch Helga, who is just like, "Well, here's this list of things that you need to be a woman, and you don't have any of them." And she's just like completely closed-minded, but everyone else kind of falls somewhere on that spectrum, but it's not necessarily somewhere they have to stay either,
Right.
which again I think Harv demonstrates really well.
Part of the challenge for all these characters is that they exist in a system that is really based in misogyny. You were saying that Jen has to complete a series of tasks in order to earn enough points, essentially,
Yes. Yep.
to go on and face the big bad. But this is a system that is not geared to include even cisgender women, let alone a trans woman.
Correct. So when you first join the Adventurers Guild, there are 12 different classes. So again, these are your typical D&D classes, like, well, I don't think Knight is a D&D class, but anyway, Knight, Paladin, Bard, Barbarian. So you have the big strong tank classes, and then the bards are like a more support class. But all of those classes are restricted to male adventurers, whereas the female adventurers are stuck with rogue, because rogues are meant to be like sneaky, deceptive, only get by using poison. You have dancer, which is like a worse version of a bard. um, a ranger, which gets a lot of, which is again is just kind of like a worse version of a knight. The system is basically tells women, like cis and trans women alike, that like we don't really want you here. And so when Jen gets assigned her class, she's actually assigned the knight class because of her. They do like a full body scan, and they're just like, ooh, we can't tell if you're a man or a woman. Let me make it as arbitrary as possible. Oh, it says you're a man, which is definitely not relevant. It definitely did not come true 2 years after I wrote it, but we're not going to worry about that part. But she's essentially the first woman knight in this world because, even if people don't accept her as a woman, like she is a woman assigned this male role.
And it sets up sort of a stand-in for this world's trans people's struggle with pronouns, in that Jen is assigned a knight, and the proper address for a knight in this world is Sir, S-E-R. Right. And again, in every time Jen encounters some new character who misgenders her in this way, she tries to suggest that lady might be a better title, but that makes absolutely no sense to them, since women can't be knights.
Right. Getting a little bit off topic, but I think that I feel like there's a perception of like trans characters in books, and I feel like they kind of fit into a couple very specific boxes. And so my goal with Hormones is to tell a story about a trans woman, like a real life trans woman experiencing real life problems. It's not meant to be like stereotypical problems. It's not meant to be stereotypical solutions to these problems. It's meant to be like, how would a real person respond to maybe exaggerated at times transphobia, misogyny, discrimination, but like it's still real. We found out this week this stuff is real. And the story is kind of about her growing to overcome that, and like finding herself, finding her found family, and succeeding in this world despite this world clearly not wanting her to.
Yeah, right.
She's like, I'm trying to save you, dang it.
What do you see as those boxes that trans characters fit into in fiction these days? Because there's, in one sense, there's a suggestion that we should just be grateful that there are trans characters at all, because there certainly weren't when I was growing up. But you're right, they fit into certain categories, and they rarely push the bounds of that. So what do you see as those boxes?
I usually see them as a side character, like pretty much never a main character, pretty much a side character that, in fantasy specifically, they will have some kind of magical answer to their transition. Maybe the world is transphobic and sexist, but they'll have some kind of magical way to snap their fingers and become whatever, as cis as they can, and then it's just never addressed again. Then you have other stories where I think they go for that, like a transnormative approach, where they're like, okay, yes, trans people exist. Again, they have a magical equivalent to a transition, but nobody really bats an eye either way. So you have a trans character, but there's no like trans experience there. It's just
You're
say,
taking, yeah.
yeah, you say, hello, this character is a trans character. My world is not transphobic. And again, I wish that was the case. And then in more dismissive fiction, I think you have them on the side getting upset about pronouns and getting really worked up about other things. Again, I don't see that as much anymore. And of course, the whole, bury your gays trope is still, unfortunately, still see that a lot. So I don't mean to say that like that the suffering and discrimination that Jen goes through and that a lot of trans people go through is like what defines us as trans. It's just that, speaking completely for myself, I relate more to a character who is going through like certain struggles and certain pushback in order to be themselves. And I think it's more helpful to see a character experience these troubles and overcome than it is to just kind of wave them away or just have them not exist in the first place. Again, I wish they didn't exist in the first place. I wish the most, I wish that when I read a fantasy novel, that the most fantastical aspect of it isn't that the trans person is treated like a human being. But the point of hormones isn't necessarily meant to be in like a fantastical escapist power fantasy where this trans person shows up and everyone loves them immediately. There's no pushback whatsoever. It's meant to be an escapist fantasy in the fact that, okay, here's a trans woman who doesn't give a shit about all these people saying horrible things about her. You put a sword in her hand and she's going after that demon lord because like that's what she has to do to be herself.
To get home.
Yeah.
Today's episode of Transqat is brought to you by Sam Avery Media. Art is powerful. It's how we tell our stories, how we take up space, how we make the world see us. And that's exactly what Sam Avery Media is all about. The owner, Samuel Avery, is a trans photographer, artist, and filmmaker using art as advocacy, not just through his self-portraits, but through his editorial portrait work. Through his lens, Sam captures the raw, beautiful, and unapologetic truth of trans lives, turning our experience into art that speaks louder than words. Your story deserves to be seen. So let Sam help you bring it to life. Book your session now at samaverymedia.com.
Do you see Jen developing a sort of an internal motivation? Because right now she's motivated by, I have to get this done because the more time passes, the worse my weaning off of hormones is going to be. Mm-hmm. Do you see her becoming invested in the world and looking for something intrinsic to fight for?
I think she sees that a lot already. In the first novel especially, you have her in these situations where there's a much easier route that she could take that would put people in this world at risk in order to make her life easier, and she actively makes the right decision, like the good person decision, but at like that makes her life a little bit harder. She has an instance in the first novel where a farmer hires her to hunt down someone who's stealing her sheep or his sheep. When she finds the person, she has this opportunity to like, oh, I can just turn you in, I could just kill you, but hang on.
But it turns out the farmer was lying about some things in a again remarkably misogynist way. Mm-hmm. And when Jen finds out the truth, she stops, she pauses, she sees the injustice and isn't willing to exploit that for her own benefit.
Right, exactly. So I definitely see her being invested in the world. She's already making those decisions of like, I'm going to fight for this world. Yes, definitely at the moment she's still very much like I'm going to save this world. I'm going to save this world, but I mostly just want to go home. But as the series progresses, I do see her fighting for the world itself for its own good.
And this is something I guess every author gets asked, but how much of yourself is in Jen?
That's a good question, and I know it's one that I was expecting it.
Are you good with a sword, for example?
I am not. I am not good with a sword. I will say whenever I write the action scenes, I'm always like acting them out as I go. I'm like, okay, so if she swings this way, her arm is here, so that means So I try to take that approach, but I don't know. I don't actually know anything about sword play besides what I can find online. I think Jen is more of like again, kind of somebody that I wish or somebody that I could look up to in a way. So I think we have I think our backstories are pretty similar again because I'm basing a lot of this off of my own experiences or like an exaggerated form of my own experiences. When I was asked about my genitals at the workplace, it was at least in a private setting. It wasn't in front of
Oh,
the whole group.
you weren't. Were you really?
I was.
Oh,
But again, it was
Andrew.
in private, so I only had one person to report to HR, but it's fine.
Okay, I've
Um,
got to ask, how was that asked?
I had changed my gender marker pretty much everywhere, but my company didn't change my gender marker for my insurance.
Hmm.
So every time we submitted something for insurance, it would get kicked back to us saying like, "Hey, there's a mismatch between what you sent us and what we have on file." And so finally, when I dug into it, I found out that that was the reason that I was still listed as male on my company's insurance. And so when I reached out to somebody to fix it, their first response was like, "Yeah, sure thing. Just show me evidence that you had a vaginoplasty."
Oh my God.
And I was like, uh, so like just to reiterate, of like it was an instant message. I was just like, just to reiterate, you are requesting me to provide proof that I have a vagina in order to be listed as female for my insurance, even though I'm legally female literally everywhere else. And she was like, that is correct. And I'm like, thanks. Screenshot, send to HR.
Oh,
And I'm like,
wow. So you began transitioning as an adult then.
I started hormones it was actually the day after my 25th birthday. It was something that I was aware of from the time I was about like 9 years old. I mean, again, I was a child. Crazy, right? I was a child.
Can you back that up? Do you have any sort of evidence that
Like I remember a lot of instances before I turned 9 where like I felt myself drawn towards women, like women's anything, and I always felt more comfortable playing with my sisters than with anybody else, but I didn't really think about it. And then there was one night when I was 9 where I like took some clothes of my sisters, put them on in my bedroom, and I felt like fulfilled and also terrified because I was just like, if my parents find out about this, I'm on the street. And I was 9. So I lived with this like burning understanding that I was a woman at my core from the time I was like 9 to about like 20 or so, just completely denying everything. And like being super, super like controlled on my emotions and even just like how I acted, how I presented myself. I was just like, I can't relax for a second because if I relax for a second, then someone will find out that I'm actually a girl. When I was 20, I was in a relationship that was kind of controlling in like a heteronormative kind of way, whereas like I felt myself feeling increasingly pressured to act masculine. Being in that situation of being like pushed to be masculine made me realize how much that didn't fit with me and how much like I couldn't live like that. So I don't want to say I decided I was non-binary, but that was the term that I came to. And it wasn't until I was like 23, 24 when I first started actually like going out in public as a woman. And that was like the first time in my life that I actually felt like whole. Was there was this one instance in particular where a friend of mine, we went out on the town in Boston, just the two of us, and it was the first time that I was like, it wasn't a costume, you know, because I had like done cosplay before as a woman, but it was my first time going out just normally as a woman, and it was like the best night of my life. And we got back in the car, drive back to his place, and I was just sitting there like I am a trans woman. Like I I can't deny it anymore.
I know that feeling, Angie, of when the everything just kind of aligns and you realize, yeah, this is me. I didn't have any idea how to get there full time or, you know, how to make that real. But I remember a Halloween when I was in college. My sister was at the same school. She was living at a house that was exclusively young women. And she invited me to the Halloween party. And that feeling of, yeah, this is it. I need a better wardrobe.
Yes, yeah.
But this is what I'm supposed to be.
Unfortunately, that night was in February of 2020.
Oh,
So it was I like got home and I was just like, okay, I'm going to transition. I'm gonna socially transition first, and then I'm going to start looking at like physical changes, but I'm going to like, you know, be my authentic self in public more often. I had a plan, and then everything shut down.
damn you, COVID.
Yeah, right. Everything shut down, and my plan was completely out the window. So I sat there for, you know, 2 months or whatever. Um, yeah, it was up until May, I believe. I was just sitting around doing nothing, feeling worse and worse and worse about not making any progress on my transition. And so I was just like, well, if I'm going to be sitting here anyway, I might as well start hormones because those are going to take a long time. It took me about 6 weeks from that, like first between that decision to actually getting the pills. And so yeah, I started hormones on again the day after my 25th birthday. Um, and then in November of that year, I, over Thanksgiving, I was just like, you know what? I hate going to work in like collar shirts and slacks. I can't do this anymore. I like literally went into my closet, grabbed all of my clothes, and again, I was like 4 months on estrogen. I took all of my clothes, donated all of them, and I was just like, guess what, Angela? You are going to wear women's clothes to work because you are not doing this anymore.
You are out of options.
Yes. And so after about a week of that, of going to work in women's clothing, I was just like, I do not feel safe in the men's room anymore. So I guess I have to come out to everybody so I can use the women's bathroom. And so I did. And I came out to like the entire world all at once. So it was like the start of the week, I kind of just was just like, I need to use the women's bathroom. I came out at work. And then at the end of the week, I came out to my parents and I was just like, I can't do this anymore.
How were they?
Not great.
I'm sorry.
Not great. Yeah. It's a difficult situation. My mom very much wants to support me, and my dad has been respectful. My like my stepfather, the man who raised me, like completely no contact, and he like actively like bullies my mother for like supporting me. It's not a great situation, so I like have very like minimal contact with my family.
Hmm. I'm going to imagine that between that and starting this during the COVID times, that writing these books was a form of therapy.
Yes. So the funny thing about these books specifically is that the idea came to me when I think I was about a month or two away from my bottom surgery. And I guess for those who have not had the pleasure of preparing for bottom surgery, it is not fun. I think the entire process took me about, I think it was about a year and 8 months. So not a full 2 years, but it was almost a full 2 years of fighting insurance, of fighting the medical system constantly, like traveling back and forth because of course nowhere in Connecticut offers this surgery. So I had to travel for it. And then you also have to do hair removal.
Yes.
And
And we're not talking about the
no,
head.
no.
Angie, I spent my birthday one year getting electrolysis down there.
Oh
and,
my
and the
God.
whole hour I was just like, this is my birthday? This is
Yeah.
really, this is the best I can do?
To this day, that is still the most pain I've ever experienced in my life is the electrolysis in preparation for bottom surgery. But needless to say, by the T-2 months or whatever mark, I was miserable. I was exhausted. I was, fighting my company to get them to try to give me some paid leave. And I remember I was talking to a friend and I was just like, you know what? It would be really nice to just be whisked off to a fantasy world and go on an adventure and not have to deal with any of this stuff. And then I stopped and thought about it for another split second. And I was just like, wait a minute. A fantasy world would be so much worse. Because again, they would, no hormones. It's all very medieval. So
Yeah.
I was just like, no, this would be so much worse. But that's a great idea for a story.
And it allows you to have stand-ins for the challenges, for the roadblocks that you're facing out here. And I won't say the real world, because for all I know, the world Jen is in could be the real world. And
True.
but yeah, so that as you encounter difficulties with insurance or difficulties in the workplace, you can kind of work that into characters in this world.
I had this scene in mind of Jen trying to convince someone to do an orchiectomy on her in this world, and having them because you have the eunuchs in the church, right?
Right.
So I had this scene originally planned, and I had to cut it because it just didn't fit. But where essentially she's making this argument to please give me an orchiectomy so I don't have to worry about I don't have to worry as much about not having my hormones anymore. And the cleric responding no, we can't do it unless you pray every day for a year. You have to pay all this money. You have to live in the church for a certain amount of time, and so just trying to convert all of the stuff that I had to do to get my bottom surgery into the fantasy equivalent, to make it as so she would have to wait even longer to get the procedure done than it would to actually go and kill the demon lord.
Hi, folks. It's Clare interrupting. I'll keep this brief. Please consider donating to support the show. If you go to transqat.com, that's transqat.com, hit the support button and then donate. You can also visit the Transqat store and support us that way. And if you're a business or an organization, please consider sponsoring the show. We have a few slots left for season 3, but we will also be looking for sponsors for season 4. Thank you for your support.
Ventilus was a snap.
Yes.
But it points to the hypocrisy in, well, let's just say a church, right? Mm-hmm. We can put it in the church that Jen.
Oh, the bishop.
The bishop is using Jen as a propaganda piece, mm-hmm. but is not at all supportive or.
No, very much oh, look at the champion of light. Isn't he amazing? Please donate your money.
Right, exactly. But that's, symbolically, the Catholic Church makes its priests declare celibacy, mm-hmm. makes them wear garments that are traditionally the feminine garment in this culture, right?
Yeah.
A sort of a skirt instead of trousers. But at the same time is actively denying people who would like to move in that direction not in a symbolic way, but in a real committed way.
So I think I will work that scene in eventually. Stay tuned, but
Okay.
it
Oh,
just
I'm in.
it just didn't fit in volume one.
Do you have a copy of Volume 2 nearby? I'm looking at page 62 onto 63, and I know where I want to end it, but I'm not sure where I want to begin it. They're in a tavern. There are some stereotypically masculine barbarian types
Hmm.
who are bragging about the day's work.
And they start hypothesizing if this dancer named Sadie is interested in Jen. And so their response then is that, like, oh, Jen keeps insisting that he's a woman. So, and that's against the church for two
Right.
women to be together.
Now, Jen's partner in again, I'm going to try not to say the real world, but in the world that Jen originated from is feminine identified.
Yes. So yeah, so Jen kind of just brushes it off. She's heard way worse. She's experienced way worse, so she's just sort of just like, yeah, whatever. Like, it doesn't surprise me that this world is anti-gay, but one of her friends has a surprising response. So I'll start reading there. Jean rested his manicured hand on my shoulder. At first, I thought he meant the gesture to be comforting, but then his fingers dug into me as if I were a stress ball. When I looked up to tell him off, he was glaring daggers at the two barbarians, eyes wet. I blamed my pounding head for being so slow on the uptake. My friend needed me. Hey, do you want me to say something to them? I asked, resting a hand on his back. Jean sighed and released his grip to wipe away the tears. My apologies, noble champion. I should be the one reassuring you. I waved off his apology. Do the scriptures say it's a sin for women to do the nasty with other women? Or men with other men? They don't, in fact. Jean offered me a weak smile. I checked. So those guys are full of shit. Not exactly. The Light Mother's word is law, and the Archbishop speaks with her voice. I finished for him, unsurprised. Got it. It's been part of church doctrine for so long, it may as well be in the scriptures, Jean grumbled. It's just always felt so wrong to me. The Light Mother is the ultimate bastion of love, is she not? Why would she smile on one kind of love, but not another?
Love is love
Yeah,
in any world.
absolutely. When I was writing Jean in the first book, I kind of was trying to picture. So again, all of these characters are meant to be subversions or like misfits in this world, just in different ways. So Jean, I pictured instead of this like super buff, pretentious, or not, I mean, he's pretentious, but the super buff, pretentious, by the book church guy, he's essentially a gay man as a paladin. Like, and so he's very like, I don't know the best way to put it, but he's such a joy to write. I mean, they all are, but
Well, he seems
um
to be aware of how pretentious he is. You know what I mean? As opposed to someone who's just an oaf. He seems to be aware that, yeah, this is just who I am. Sorry.
yeah. There was that line in the second book where Jen says something like, "Oh, who would do that besides a crazy paladin?" "Oh, sorry, Jean." And Jean's just like, "Oh, don't worry, I'm not a paladin anymore." Like, "Oh, that's the part you had a problem with." But yeah, that's one of the ways that he kind of subverts that trope is that he is, a gay man who is ostracized from the church, but he's still very much like a devout follower of the Light Mother, the goddess from the beginning that I mentioned. And so it comes to a head at the end of the first novel where there are other paladins who the church sent who are actively trying to like follow the archbishop's words, whereas Jean is trying to follow what the Light Mother preaches or what she stands for. And so the two sides clash there. And again, not very subtle on my part, I will admit, but I think it's effective.
But the notion of let's eliminate the intermediary,
Mhm.
whereas those other paladins are taking their marching orders from the bishop, Jean is saying, I'm going to listen for this divinity to speak to me and I'm going to really try not to rely on secondhand, but I'm going to prove my devotion to the Light Mother.
Again, as questionable as that might be, but it's at least more pure than what's going on with the church.
Last question, bit of a devil's advocate question. Are you familiar with the Bechdel test? Alison,
yes,
cartoonist Alison Bechdel. So this is something that comes out of her strip Dykes to Watch Out For. And she says that the test is in a movie or in a piece of fiction that there are at least 2 women characters, that they be named, and that they have a conversation that is not about guys.
Right.
Now you see the whole arc of your story, whereas I've only read the first 2. Do you see this series as passing the Bechdel test?
Well, I would say the very first conversation the very first conversation in the book is between Jen and Lenora. So right away, just saying. I would say there is less representation right at the beginning of women characters, and that I'm working on the 3rd novel in the series right now, and that is going to continue again for like specific reasons. But you have the character of Mina, who is the receptionist / pretty much everything at the guild hall, like everything besides being the guild master herself. She does everything, and she is very cold towards Jen, which Jen interprets as like some kind of fear, or like being intimidated by her as a trans woman. And so she uses Mina's responses to kind of beat herself up. And what that's meant to hint at, and why Jen kind of gravitates towards Harv and towards Jean as opposed to someone like Mina, is this like internalized transphobia, essentially, where she struggles to connect with other women who she kind of feels inferior towards. So again, she's able to feel like herself around men because she's just like, oh well, I'm clearly not a man. But when she's around a cis woman, she starts thinking, oh, like maybe I'm yes. So I think that's one of Jen's flaws. I will say right up front that is a flaw that Jen has, and something that she will be working on throughout the series. And so there are, at least again, right at the beginning, there aren't a ton of female characters, but there are definitely some. And
yeah,
she has that conversation with Dahlia halfway through the first book. They are talking about the farmer for parts of it, so you can Bechdel that whichever way you want. But
and is it, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but is it Invira in the second book?
Oh, Navira, yeah.
Navira, sorry. So, and I ask that because in sort of a meta way, just as this world you've created that Jen is now in is very much a patriarchy and exclusionary of women, I don't think it's unfair to say that traditionally fantasy is that same way.
Absolutely.
I remember at one point reading some of Robert Asprin's Myth series, the Myth Inc., and coming away feeling that like there's a lot of the same elements that are in your books in terms of humor and in terms of vignettes along the way leading up to something. But after a while, I found it really unkind to its female characters. And maybe that was just of its time. But I wanted listeners to know that this series isn't that at all. That
yes.
This is a series that, at least in the first 2, seems very welcoming, and you should definitely check it out. Tell folks how to find it.
Oh, yes. So currently the first 2 volumes are available through Amazon, both in paperback and Kindle formats. You can also read it for free on Kindle Unlimited. You can reach out to me. I have a website, www.angelawicke.com, and that's Wicke.
No relation to John.
No relation to John Wick. And you can find the links to the books there. You can find links to my editor and the person who did my beautiful cover art.
It is. Both of them are gorgeous.
Can't really see it there.
Oh,
please.
the blurring here. I'll put up
there
mine.
it goes.
So
Perfect.
there's
Yes.
One, and there's two. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, she did a fantastic job. But you could find links to both of them on there, as well as some short stories that I wrote, and I'll be posting any updates on book signings and other appearances on there. I will say that I'm trying to get some more tables at local events in the Connecticut, New York City area. So if you're around and at something fantasy related, I will be trying to be there, and you can stop and say hi. And then, yeah, my contact information as well is on the website.
Anything that I forgot to ask? Anything you wanted to be sure to talk about that I missed?
Yeah, I would just say that it is a difficult time to be trans, like especially like openly trans. And I can understand why someone wouldn't necessarily want to read a book where like there is transphobia, there is this discrimination, this misogyny. And so I will say, if that doesn't sound like something that you have the energy for right now, or you don't have the bandwidth for right now, I totally understand. But I will say, I intentionally wrote these books not to be super depressing and not to take it too far. I want you to have the idea, or at least someone who doesn't have that experience can come away with the understanding like, oh, this is transphobia, this is misogyny, maybe this is something that I've seen in real life. But it's not meant to be depressing. It's not meant to be like oppressive either. And essentially the moral is that you can overcome anything and be yourself. So if that sounds good to you, definitely check it out. Otherwise, maybe put it on your list for when you have a little bit more energy.
Yeah.
It'd mean the world to me.
Next up on Transqat, we'll be talking healthcare with APRN Jörg Augenfuss. Jörg is a queer medical provider, more than 15 years experience. He specializes in gay men's health and hormone therapy for folks who are transitioning. So join us in 2 weeks for that. A few housekeeping items. Tomorrow night is Sex Trivia with Kim and Clare, 6 to 8 p.m. at the Blue Orchid in New Haven. Come have a drink and some laughs and a bowl of cow soy. This Tuesday, April 22nd, I'll be hosting the Prism Book Club at the East Haven Public Library. Join us as we discuss Joy Ladin's book of poetry entitled Family. And on May 1st, Cine Studio in Hartford is screening a documentary called Sabbath Queen.
I broke the law. According to our family story, I descend from 38 consecutive generations of rabbis.
I feel sorrow for a Jew who doesn't follow tradition.
I've created this fictitious character.
That's gross.
You take the traditions and you basically threw them away. You denied really who you are.
The next evolution, God optional, everybody friendly, congregation.
Women are claiming their right to pray the way I believe a Jew should be in the 21st century.
So we're pushing a lot of boundaries here to approach increasingly divisive voices.
Will Hamas give you peace?
Intermarriage is ruining the Jewish nation.
Questioning the faiths we grew up with was so painful.
Beautiful, radical fairy Amichai. You want to be rabbi?
Who gets to be a Jew?
A Jew who doesn't follow tradition, but to change it? Who are you to change it?
I think I'm doing the right thing. Sometimes I'm not sure. But a rabbi doesn't leave his congregation.
I'll be leading a live Q&A session with director Sandy Dubowski after the film, so join us on the Trinity campus for that. This has been Transqat. I'm Clare McCarthy. Thank you for listening, and let's talk soon.
This is Sadie McCarthy. I'm Claire's niece.
And you've just been listening to Transqat. It is made by one of my favorite people in the world, Clare McCarthy.
Transqat is a production of Transqat Enterprises, LLC.
Copyright 2023, all rights reserved.
Join us on the web at transqat.com.
That's TRANSQAT.com.
QAT.com.
QAT.com. There you'll find links to Transqat, the blog,
writing projects,
speaking engagements,
and our PayPal donations page.
Please consider
consider supporting our mission with your monkeys.
Monies.
Your monies.
Your monies. Not monkeys.
Please consider supporting our mission with your monies. Any monkeys will be gratefully received as well.
Follow Transqat on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.
On TikTok, we are at The Real Transqat.
Want to tell your story on air?
Or ask Claire a question?
What is the deal?
She has all the answers.
Or suggest a guest or topic for an upcoming episode.
Use the contact page at the website
or email her directly at crmtranscat@gmail.com.
crmtranscat@gmail.com.
And thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Bye.